we're going through Hebrews still. We're going through Faith's Hall of Fame. And by the end of it, we'll have a record of the whole of Hebrews 11's characters that people can go to on YouTube, should they want to. Well, today we're in Hebrews chapter 11, 32, and we're coming to the conclusion of this section in Hebrews 11, the Faith's Hall of Fame. We have been going through individuals, one after the other, and each individual described by the author of Hebrews, who I believe is Paul, is given a short explanation of why they believed God. By faith they did this, and by faith they did that. And now we come to Hebrews 11:32, and it's like the author of Hebrews is now saying, look, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to show you that this continues and that you yourself can actually go to the scriptures and you yourself can find godly people and say, by faith they did. I've taught you by going through these people, I've taught you how you can see and examine a character of the Bible and say by faith. So now, what more shall I say? For time would fail for me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. So now we're moving to names without explanations. It's like the author is saying, okay, Gideon. Well, why don't you go and say by faith, Gideon? You work out Gideon, you work out Barak, you work out Samson, you work out Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and any of the prophets. You go, and with what I've taught you, you would be able to sort of continue my teaching and say, by faith Gideon, by faith Barak, by faith Samson. And then after these names that he throws out as examples and the prophets, we'll find that in the next verse, he then switches from names to circumstances. He then goes into the general, and he says, right, now I've given you names, you provide the by faith. And then in the next verse, you'll see, he'll say, now I'll give you the circumstances and you provide the names. By faith, women received their dead back from life. By faith, people were sawn in two. By faith, and so he goes into the general. But here we are. And when I come to this passage with you, we're going to look at Gideon and Barak today. Gideon and Barak, weak men made strong in faith. Now, I learnt this from a wonderful book called Believing God from R.T. Kendall. So this teaching, I get a lot of teaching from his book, Believing God, which is on Hebrews 11, but this comes directly from him. And he says that you can put these named individuals together. He says you put Gideon and Barak together, and they're weak men made strong. You put Samson and Jephthah together, and you find strong men. And then you put David and Samuel together, and you find great men. So RT says Gideon and Barak were weak men. Samson and Jephthah were strong men, and David and Samuel were great men. So when we talk about Gideon and Barak, examples of weak men that found themselves in the faith's hall of fame. Well, let's just quickly go to Judges chapter 4, which talks about Barak. But you can only ever talk about Barak, can't you, in the company of Deborah. There's no Barak without Deborah. And of course, Deborah being one of the most famous women in the Bible. I mean, you can hardly have a women's conference without Deborah being mentioned, can you? And many women's ministries, people call themselves the women Deborahs because she's such a great role model. Now, here we got Deborah, a prophet, and here we go. Start from Judges 4, verse 6. Deborah sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and troops to the Kishron River, and give him into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, and he gets the army, and verse 16, Barak pursued the chariots and army, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword, not a man was left. So he got the victory. And then we have this wonderful, which is worth looking at sometime in its own right, the Song of Deborah in Judges 5. On that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sung this song. And it talks about Deborah arose, a mother in Israel. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, arise, Barak. And then at the end of this wonderful song, it says the land had peace 40 years. So there's Barak, and, not going into too much detail there, but you can read the story in your own way. We find that Barak was a weak man made strong. And R.T. Kendall makes these points. He talks about how Barak was weak because he was told by the prophetess of the Lord to go and do it. But he didn't feel that he was strong enough to do it by himself. He wanted Deborah to go with him. And R.T. in his book says that that's not necessarily a bad thing. He says, R.T., that Barak okay, Francesca, I wanted to call the women's ministry Deborah's Arising. Well, you still can.
The Apostle Dowdy said no, it's too common.
All right, okay, just playing with you. But yeah, Deborah's the great rebel. So R.T. says he is weak, but R.T. said it's not necessarily that Barak is weak and unbelieving. It might be just that he knew his limits. He knew he needed help. He knew what his limits were, and he thought, you know what, if you come with me, I'll definitely do it. And that it wasn't necessarily bad. And also, when she said, okay, but, and remember, we're in a patriarchal society in those days, very much so. Okay, I'll go with you. But I will get the glory. They'll all say a woman defeated the enemy. But perhaps to his credit, Barak was like, fine, what matters is the victory takes place. So R.T. sort of says there could be a way of looking at this where, okay, Barak was weak, and okay, maybe he should have just got up and done it and had enough faith. We've been hearing about people encouraging us to increase our faith this evening. Maybe he should have just increased his faith and done it. And maybe he should have, and probably he should. But what a wonderful human story. He was like, I know my limits. I'm prepared to do it, but I do need your help. Well, you should be able to do it yourself. True, but I don't feel that I can. And so I'm being honest, but do come with me and I will do it. Well, you won't get the glory. I'm not bothered about the glory. I just want the job to be done, and I'm asking for your help. So there's what you might call a weak man who did the Lord's will, but asked for help. He was human in doing it. And in the end, of course, by faith, he trusted, he did what the prophet said. He did lean on her as well and say, please come with me, but he did it. So by faith, he trusted God, trusted the words of the prophet, faltered a little bit, asked for help, wasn't afraid to ask for help, and wasn't glory hunting. He just wanted the job to be done. And I think that's a really encouraging person to be put in the Faith's Hall of Fame. I think, we're finding in this Faith's Hall of Fame that not everybody was perfect. They made their mistakes, but they came to a place of trusting God. It's not all or nothing. It's not all or nothing. And so there's a beautiful place where he became a man of faith. He grew in his faith. He needed help, and God was happy to help him, and so was the prophetess. And in the end, they both got the glory of believing God. And we could put Deborah in there too, but I think that Barak was named because I think it was a good story. So we talk about Barak, but what about the second person? Another weak man. We've got Barak, and now we've got Gideon. And the interesting thing is, Barak becomes a judge of Israel. In Judges, what's the cycle of Judges? The people forget God, and God allows the enemy to come in to persecute them until they remember God and cry out to God. And then God sends a deliverer, often called a judge. And that judge or deliverer comes and breaks the yoke of the enemy and sets up peace. But then when that deliverer, that judge dies, they forget about what God has done, and the cycle is repeated. The enemies come in. They then cry out to the Lord. The Lord hears them, sends a deliverer. Peace comes for a certain amount of time until they forget the Lord their God, and it all goes round again. It's the judge's cycle. And so we've got Gideon. Now, Barak brought 40 years, a generation of peace. And you keep getting this 40 years. Gideon's going to bring 40 years. You say, is it exactly 40 years? It doesn't really matter if it is or not. It's a generation. It means a whole generation was rescued and brought to peace by the faith of the judges. And then you've got Gideon. And I think you know the story. The first thing that happened was Gideon was hiding, wasn't he, trying to save some of his crop. And then the angel of the Lord turns up to Gideon and says to him, we're looking at Judges chapter 6, and in Judges 6:11, I won't turn to it, I haven't time, but it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And Gideon was not filled with faith by this faith pronouncement. He wasn't a mighty warrior. He said, look, wait a second. I come from the smallest tribe in Israel. And not only that, I come from the smallest family in the smallest tribe in Israel. And I am the smallest. I'm not a mighty warrior. And I'm not sure I believe that you are with me. I don't know. I don't have that kind of faith. And what did God do? Well, Gideon asked for the signs. Do you remember? He asked for a number of signs, the fleece and the grass, and the dew on the fleece, but not the grass, and the dew on the grass and not the fleece. And God was patient with him. God is patient with us as we grow in faith. We're looking at people in Faith's Hall of Fame, and we're looking at weak people and people that don't start strong in faith, but are weak, frail, but they're willing to partner with God, and God is extremely gracious to them. Don't feel it's all or nothing. God is at work in your life. God knows our weaknesses. God knows that we can be weak in faith, and and he doesn't rebuke us. I think the only time God rebukes us, rebukes our unbelief, is when he's given us so much evidence that it's at the point where, come on, grow up. And when Jesus rebukes the disciples' unbelief, come on, they were seeing miracles every day. I mean, miracles every day. So when Jesus rebuked the disciples for their unbelief, I mean, come on, that, every day they were seeing incredible miracles. But here in Faith's Hall of Fame, it's not like that. It's not all or nothing. It's God working with us. And so if you feel weak in faith, if at times you think, oh, I'm not as strong as I should be in believing God, well, it's not over for you. You can still find yourself in Faith's Hall of Fame. You can grow. You can ask for help. You can say, I'm weak in this area. You know, like BARAK. You know, I need you to go with me. You can say like Gideon, well, you know, help me. I don't feel like I am what you've told me to do. It's not unbelief to say that. It's a weakness, but you're with your faith trainer, which is the Holy Spirit. So God was very gracious to Gideon, and you know the rest of the story. And Gideon grew in faith with the signs. He grew in faith, and then he got all these thousands and thousands of men, didn't he? And God, you know, use different ways to get to make the men smaller and smaller. You know, how they drank their water. Whoever was fearful, can you imagine? Whoever's fearful, you can go back. And you know, think about Gideon during that time, seeing his men get less and less and less, because God wanted to make sure they understood that the victory was the Lord's. And then that wonderful, miraculous strategy of blowing the horns and smashing the lamps, and the rest is history. And then Gideon gave 40 years of rest to the Israelites. So 2 men, weak men. Next week we'll look at 2 men, strong men, and the week after 2 men, great men. But the lesson for us today is 2 men that started off very weak and needing a lot of help to establish their faith, and weren't afraid to express their weakness, weren't afraid to express the fact that that this is where I am, Lord. I'm not as strong as I should be. I don't feel I'm a mighty warrior, or I need a woman prophet with me. Then I know I can do it. They were very honest with the Lord about their weaknesses, and God did not deny them because of that, but God worked with them. But they didn't stay weak. They became strong, and they grew, and by faith they both defeated the enemy. So we can take away from that we may have weak moments, we may have doubts, but that's not the end of the story. That's part of the process. And that anybody who feels that they're weak in faith are still a candidate to get into God's Faith's Hall of Fame. Thank you, Pastor Dory.